stupid. I know I didn't clear that, but come on.
That's hilarious.
All right, right behind me is the Amflow PL Carbon Pro e-bike. You may have heard about this. It's been kind of causing a buzz throughout the mountain bike industry over the past few months, and I've had it. I've been riding it for the past few weeks. However, this is a sponsored video, and there are a few topics that I'm required to say, and I am going to get to keep the bike after I'm done with these videos. However, I do want to be upfront and honest that I am being paid to make this video, and they will see this video before I release it to the public. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about what this bike does well, some of the things I think it missed on, and some things I think they could add to make this bike even better. So there's actually a lot of topics I want to hit on for this video, so I'm going to be referencing my phone because I can't remember all of the things I want to talk about. So let's start off with the basics. I've gotten a few bikes from manufacturers over the years. This one was without a doubt the most easily to assemble bike. Everything was ready to plug in and go. Obviously you still have to like screw a few things together, but from start to finish, there are a lot of interesting things that they did well, and I think other companies should take note of. The way they boxed the wheels, the dropper post was already installed. The cables are basically already cut to length. This was the easiest bike to set up from getting it to going.
Take notice, there's no reflectors on the wheels. It came with reflectors, but they're not installed.
Ooh, magnetic charging port.
Oh, yeah, I like that. This thing's plugged in and it's charging. And it's got a charge, estimate time, battery percentage. I like that. That doesn't seem like a big deal, but let me take you over here. On this Shimano system, this thing does not turn on. The only indication is on this thing. When it's solid, that means it's charged. That's the only indication that you know that your bike is charged. I have not personally used any other system besides for Shimano, so I don't know if the other companies do anything else, but that's been one of the things that has frustrated me with some of my e-bikes is you have to look for this tiny little LED to see if it's charged, whereas this thing, you just look at this bad boy.
One thing we need to talk about this bike is what the intended usage of this bike is. So on the down tube, there's a category 4 mountain bike classification. If you've never heard of that, neither have I. I had to look this up. And so the way you can think of it as is essentially a way to more objectively quantify a bike. This is a category 4. So it's not meant to do the things that downhill bikes are. And it's supposed to fall right below an enduro bike. That would put it at an all mountain bike. And on the literature on their website, they actually talk about this. And I didn't even notice that until this morning when I was doing some research for this video. I've been riding it over the past few weeks and I've kind of come to that conclusion on my own. Now I think the thing that makes this bike the most interesting is its Avanox motor. This is the thing that really separates it from everything else. Not all e-bike motors are created equal, and they all have a different feel. I've only tested Shimano motors, and the Avanox has a completely different feel. I would describe this one as feeling very human-like. It responds the way I expect an electric motor to assist me. It does it in a way that doesn't feel unnatural. It doesn't cut out when it reaches that 20-mile-an-hour threshold. There's no delay when you start pressing down on the cranks. It does everything very naturally, and that was the thing I found the most surprising. I've been spending a lot of time on Shimano-equipped e-bikes, and those feel a little robotic, a little artificial. This thing was not that at all. Now, something that adds to that experience is the interface that you use when you're using the bike. So the way you interact with the bike is a touchscreen, and it's very responsive. You can basically make all of the adjustments that you need to through the onboard touchscreen. So from the touchscreen, you can do the basics. You can change the modes. You can change the dynamics of each mode. So if you want a mode to be a little bit more engaging or a little bit less engaging, you can do that. There are so many changes that you can make on that touchscreen that I won't even have a chance to tackle them all in this video. Now, one of the interesting things about this bike is if you want, you can add a SIM card. So if someone steals the bike, you essentially have like a Find My device and you can essentially lock them out of using it. There's also a PIN code. You can also have it use your phone as a proximity sensor. So just like how modern cars sometimes use their phone to unlock them, this thing does the same thing. All right, so before we talk about some of the electronic capability, I do want to touch on some of the components because that does integrate seamlessly with the motor. So first of all, you have your brakes. They use the Magura MT7s. Everyone has different opinions about brakes. This is the first time I've used Magura in a very long time, so it took me a little while to get used to. There's some nifty tricks up Magura's sleeve. But I wanted to show you something I found really nifty, kind of interesting. These are 4-piston
actually come with 4 separate brake pads for one set, so 1 pad per piston. Unlike normal pads that have like a spring that keeps them separated, these use magnets. Ta-da! The magnet holds it in place.
Now, the stock pads I found to be a little lackluster. I didn't find that they had the bite that I was looking for, so I swapped those out for something a little bit more gritty. I didn't go with the race compound, I went with like the gray compound. It's got a little bit more bite in the wet and the dry. However, it makes a little bit more noise.
And for what it's worth, these were the pads that came on it.
Carbon seat. Look at that. Dang. Like, it's nice to see that, yes, this bike is expensive, but it comes with good parts.
Front and back, it has Fox suspension, top of the line, so you have your Fox 36 in the front, high and low speed rebound, high and low speed compression. It has short, I think they're 155 or 150 mil cranks. They're the shortest cranks I've ever ridden since, you know, my tricycle days. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but I kind of liked it, but also found myself wanting longer cranks at the same time. It was a weird mix. It gives you the advantage of being able to pedal over chunky terrain without worrying about clipping your pedal. But like if you're trying to put down power, I found that not having the leverage was something I had to get used to, but that's where the motor kicks in, and so you kind of don't really need that. It was just an adjustment. Now, something else to take note is it does have carbon wheels. These are their own in-house brand carbon hoops. In my experience, they were nothing to shy away from. I put this bike kind of through hell and rode it through a lot of chunky terrain. The one thing I will say they fell a little bit short on is the tire spec. So I would have loved to see these come equipped with double downs, and in fact I put a downhill casing in the back and a double down in the front. I just made a few modifications to the bike to make it feel more like the bikes that I know. That way when I jump from one bike to another, it feels more similar to the bikes I've been riding. On the note of changing things, I did change the stem and I changed the handlebars. That just made my job getting used to this bike a lot easier. The bars that come on it are carbon 35 mil bars with a 35 mil stem. I think most people would not need to change it. The one thing I haven't touched on, and this does play a huge effect on the motor, is SRAM transmission. Now, you've heard me over the past few years when I do bike checks that I don't really care for wireless drivetrain. That doesn't necessarily extend to electronic drivetrain, but it kind of does. I actually think the integration here has enough. So it is equipped with a T-type derailleur, and you've heard me over the past few years kind of say how I don't like wireless transmission. However, this one is wired. You can wire it directly into the motor, which means you don't have any extra batteries to charge. It also adds some software tricks up its sleeve. One of those nifty software tricks is something called auto shift. So let's say you're coming down a hill and there's a quick punchy ascent coming up. While you're still descending, you can shift while coasting and it will automatically shift into the easier gear. So when you go to pedal, you're not getting bogged down. So essentially you can shift ahead of time without worrying about ghost pedaling. I have used cable actuated derailleurs. They're reliable, they're cheap, but this feature is actually an enhancement, and I think it's enough of an enhancement that I think it actually makes the bike experience better. Because this bike comes equipped with SRAM transmission, it also comes equipped with the wireless transmission pod for the shifter, and I just find it weird feeling. Over the few weeks I've been riding this bike, it's not something that I've really gotten used to. Like, it just feels weird. Not necessarily bad, but having grown up using a cable actuated shifter, I really had a hard time getting used to it. I also couldn't find a comfortable position for the shifter pod. Again, this is more a comment on SRAM than it is on Amflow, but again, if you're buying the PL Carbon Pro, you're gonna get that, and I think it's worth noting. So a few more things on this bike. Because the screen is on the top tube, that means you don't have another thing on your handlebars. I actually really hate handlebar clutter. I hate all the gizmos that people are putting on their handlebars. I just think it looks ugly. Actually, that's another thing I want to touch on before I forget. I forgot to make a note of it, but there is no internal headset routing. Another important thing in terms of looks is if you look at it really quickly, this does not look like an e-bike. Most people I ran into didn't realize I was on an e-bike. A, because the motor is super quiet. and 2, the down tube is proportional to the bike like a normal bike. Now the next thing I'm going to move on to is a little bit controversial. This bike is capable of being a class 3 e-bike. Out of the box, this is not enabled. You actually have to search for this feature. What that means is it allows you to go up to 28 miles an hour with e-assist. By default, that is not enabled. I want to be clear about that. By default, that is not enabled. You have to go searching for it in the settings menu. Where I think this is particularly useful is 2 scenarios. If you live near a trailhead, but maybe you're just out of range where you might jump in a car and drive there, now you might think about riding your bike. That means less cars plugging the parking lot at the trailhead. That means less cars on the road. The second situation that I find very useful for that is big jumps. Now, this is a very niche use case. So on this thing, let's say I'm coming up to a jump. I'm going 22 miles an hour and I realize I need a little bit more speed. It will help assist you to get that little bit more speed to clear the jump. Sometimes I have found on other e-bikes, when I'm pedaling at a jump that cut off at 20 miles an hour, I actually can't get up to the speed that I want to. I can get up to speed better on my regular bike because the motor isn't bogging me down. This is a very niche scenario and I don't think many people are going to use that, but I do think there are some legitimate uses for the class 3 mode. Also, when I was researching this, there are 3 categories of e-bikes, but over in Europe, maybe specifically Germany, e-bikes have a different name. These are called pedelecs. Pedelecs are only pedal assisted e-bikes. So there's no ambiguity whether they're throttle assisted. There's no class 2. If it's pedelec, you have a motor that assists you. There's no throttle. Thought I'd throw that out there. It's just kind of a little detail that I learned through riding this bike and researching the different classifications of e-bikes getting prepared for this video.
Okay, so they were smart. So this is a trunnion mount shock, which means there's a bolt that threads into the shock. Normally you need a spacer in between the frame and the shock, which is really frustrating because they always fall out. But they were smart. These spacers have a little lip to them. That means they don't fall out when you go to try to put the shock in. So I can really easily lift the bike up like this with one hand, because 90% of the time you go to put a trunnion mount shock in and these washers fall out.
But I just realized I forgot to add something that I think is a pretty huge selling point. You can sync up heart rate monitors to the bike, and you can also sync up other action cameras such as the Osmo Action Cam. Let's say you want to control the camera from the bike itself, you can do that. But not to mention, because you have a heart rate monitor synced up to the bike, you can take the heart rate data and overlay that on your video. So not only are you getting the torque, the speed, the power, but you're getting the heart rate that you're putting out. I think some people are really going to find that integration really, really useful. So with all of the things I like about this out of the way, let's talk about some of the things I thought were amiss before we get into how it behaves on the trail. First of all, one of the cons is you need to pair it with a phone. You have, I think, 3 attempts, or maybe you have 100 kilometers of riding before you need to actually pair it. Now, personally, I don't love having to download an app and make an account. However, this is the world we live in, and actually the process is pretty seamless. So in terms of installing an app and getting it set up, it was pretty seamless, but also means you actually need a smartphone, which I also think is kind of annoying. Okay, so it got really dark, so we're gonna move locations to try to find a little bit more sunlight. If you see any smoke entering the screen, it's the thermal cell. There's a bunch of mosquitoes around, so that helps keep them away. Okay, the second miss on this bike, and to me this is the most glaring, is the stock location of the bottle cage mounts. As you can see, I do have a bottle and I do have a bottle cage on the bike, but I had to do a little bit of jerry rigging to get it to fit there. The stock location, if you're to put a bottle inside it, it interferes with the piggyback on the shock. Now you could run a smaller Fidlock bottle, but I am not a camel. I sweat like a pig and I need a lot of water on me, even on the e-bike when I go riding. So if there's one thing I would like to suggest to Amflow while I have your attention, because I know you're watching this video, is I would like to see a custom bottle cage made for this bike. A bottle cage is something that people use on a regular basis that most people would find extremely hard to live without. Now, something I did notice after riding this bike, I do have a chip on the bottom of the motor. Most e-bikes have the motor completely covered with a plastic guard. This one has a little bit of the motor protruding. I think a rock kicked up into the motor and chipped off one of those pins. I think this is worth noting because if you ride on mountain bike terrain, you are going to kick up rocks and gravel. I don't know if this is something that you can replace. It's just something I noticed, and I think it's worth mentioning. Now, something else that I don't think is a huge deal breaker for most, but I've been doing a bunch of e-bike enduro races lately. Those races have a set of recognized motors. The Avinox motor is not one of them. If you're getting this with the hopes of doing an e-bike race, be sure you check your local race series to see if it's one of the approved motors. For most people, that's not gonna be a problem, but I have been doing e-bike races, and that's why you won't see me racing this bike in the e-bike race. Now, one of the last cons I have, and I probably should have led with this, if you're looking at the broad spectrum of bikes, this bike's expensive. Though, if you're looking at the premium e-bike market, it's actually a fairly good value. It's a lot of it outside of what I would pay for a bike, but you get top of the line components. The motor and drivetrain system work flawlessly, so I don't think it's that out of touch, but I do think people who are getting into mountain biking, this is not even going to be a bike in your consideration. Those of you who are in the market for a premium e-bike, I do think this is actually a fairly good value, that there's a lot of things on this bike that it does well that I don't think you can get on a lot of other bikes. I think something that a lot of people discount is like when you buy a bike, you're also kind of at the mercy of what a bike company has on their website. If you're trying to replace parts, figure out how to set it up. I think Amflow did a really good job with their documentation. It was the first bike I got that actually had really nice manuals. It kind of reminded me of like a video game back in the 90s where you'd open it up and you'd actually want to read it. On the website, they have even more information, documentation, tutorials, but there was a few things that I thought that they missed, and so I'm going to list one of them. Is some of the component specs weren't listed. This is a nitty thing, but like a headset, for example, it's a part that you're going to have to replace over the lifetime of the bike. I couldn't find that spec listed on their website. And to be fair, most bike companies don't do that either. And something else I think that they can do is maybe have like a service kit for the bike. So if you do need to service your bearings, they have all the bearings that you need to replace in one easy to find location. That way you're not having to remove the bearing, look at the little number, and order the bearing accordingly, which is what I've had to do with most of my bikes over the past few years. This bike is what I would kind of call an aggressive trail bike, but I wouldn't go as far as to call it an enduro bike. I found that in most trail bike situations, this bike felt really zippy, felt really nimble, and you notice the lightness. At the same time, compared to some of my heavier weight e-bikes, I didn't feel as comfortable when I got up to speed, especially when going through chunky terrain. After going through some of the documentation this morning when preparing for this video, I realized they actually made that distinction on their website pretty clear. So on Amflow's website, they're making a big distinction that this is not an enduro bike. This is an all mountain bike. I have normally called that category of riding aggressive trail riding. Either way, all mountain kind of slots slightly above trail and slightly below enduro. So you can do a lot of things that you would do on an enduro bike. You just might not go as fast. What I did find is on trails that it was really fun, poppy, zippy, and I had a huge smile on my face. Actually, over the past few weeks, I have found myself gravitating towards wanting to grab this bike and have had to make a conscious effort to grab some of my other bikes to give this one a break. I think they actually did a really good job positioning this bike and hitting their mark as to what they're trying to achieve. But I think where you would not want to bring this bike is super fast, high-speed riding. I think that's where you would want to gravitate towards more of an enduro e-bike. Though I do think you could ride that same terrain you would just have to go a little bit slower. There's also something I forgot to mention, that this is actually a size large. If you've watched my channel for any number of time, you know that I usually go with a medium. Normally I run a medium with a slightly longer stem, which gives me more traction over the front. At the time of making this bike, they didn't have a medium available, so I've been riding a large. For a large, I tend to size down on stems, meaning I put a 35 mil length stem. Now, over the past few weeks that I've had this bike, I have played around with the suspension settings in the cockpit setup. I ended up going down a little bit in air pressure and raising the handlebars up a little bit. That did make the bike feel a little bit more confident and inspiring, and it's worth mentioning that for my style of riding, I had to go quite a bit above the stock setup by almost 20 psi front and back. I do think it's also worth acknowledging that I raced downhill World Cups at one point, and I do ride a little bit more aggressively than most riders, so to get the bike to perform the way I wanted to and feel comfortable, those are kind of things I had to do. So I think in the front I'm running 115 psi, and in the back end settled with 215. Okay, I can't believe I made it this far into the video without even touching on the different modes that this bike comes with. So there are 5 basic modes. You have Auto, you have Eco, you have Trail, Boost, and Turbo. So Eco is your typical battery conserving mode. I actually found it to be similar to the Trail modes on some of my other bikes. The second mode is Auto. Normally Auto is listed before Eco, but you can rearrange the way that the modes are listed, and in my opinion, Auto felt way more powerful than Eco, so I found myself putting Eco at the beginning, and then the next mode up was Auto. Auto is where I found myself spending the most amount of time. It felt most natural. It gave you ample power, like everything that I could ask for an e-bike, it gave. So the next mode up is Trail. Trail is actually pretty aggressive. It felt very similar to boost modes on my Shimano motors. Like, it was pretty freaking fast. So above Trail, you have Turbo. Turbo is a mode that you're going to want to use if you're on your lunch break and you're trying to sneak in a few laps. It will get you to the top of the hill as quickly as possible at the sacrifice of battery life. This mode is insanely powerful, but there's still one mode left, and that's Boost mode. Boost mode is a short burst of power which unlocks a full 1,000 watts from the motor. This will give you superhuman-like power, but for a short duration of time. Now use this carefully because this mode is insanely fun. In no way should I be able to make it up this incline, but I can. By default, it's not enabled. You have to go into deep settings, and the default setting is 30 seconds. It's one of those modes that kind of reminds me of like the gimmick that you see on a Tesla, which is you have like a launch start or whatever it is that goes really fast. You see all the reviewers use that in a video, but in reality, most people never use that. But it's a fun thing to talk about and worth noting. All right, so the 6th mode that I alluded to is called Walk mode. Now, a lot of e-bikes have Walk mode, but this one is just a little bit different and really cool. So to engage Walk mode, you hold down the down button and the bike will start moving. I've already done that, so it'll start moving on its own. And then if I let go, it holds itself in place. I haven't seen any other e-bike do this. Let's say you're on unstable terrain and you need to move yourself. Well, you can move your feet and then re-engage Walk mode and let the bike do the rest of the job. Now, to be honest, I still find myself using the brake just out of habit, but this is a really neat enhancement to the typical Walk mode you see on e-bikes. Oh yeah, another thing that this bike did really well is most e-bikes, when you get them, are really loud. There's a lot of cable rattlage. This bike was almost dead quiet except for one thing. Right here, I stole this from the Pink Bike article. I used some mastic tape to silence the extra bit of the derailleur cable that was rattling inside the chainstay. Otherwise, the bike came with pre-cut hoses, so there weren't that much extra hose to rattle around, and I didn't have to do any searching for ways to make the bike silent. The bike was silent apart from that one rattle. Okay, so we've arrived at the end of the video and I want to try to summarize my thoughts. Amflow has managed to do a lot of things right that a lot of bike companies have been getting wrong over the past few years. I don't think this bike is for everybody. This is definitely a bike for someone who's looking for a premium bike experience. It has all the bells and whistles, it has really good components, and I think the added features that Avinox has added to their e-bike system is a really compelling thing and actually enhances your bike riding experience. I've been pleasantly surprised with this bike and I will be getting to keep it on hand, so you will see me riding it in the near future. But I do want to thank Amflow for sponsoring this video, and I also want to mention that this video is sponsored, but all the thoughts in this video were my own. This is not a review, Before you buy this, go watch some actual reviews from people who weren't sponsored and see what they think of this bike. I also want to thank you for listening to me ramble for the past however long this video is. But the video has finally reached its conclusion and I'm ready for some food. So that's where we're gonna end off the video. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.